Her phone lit up on the bathroom counter. Minjun. She could not move. Not because she didn't want to answer. Not because things between them were complicated. They weren't. Not anymore. For the first time in longer than she could honestly remember, things between them were good. Real. The kind of good that had stopped feeling fragile and started feeling like something you could actually build on. She was holding a pregnancy test in both hands. And it was positive. The bathroom was her own. Her Lagos apartment. 5 days before the flight, she had already booked to Seoul. This one was not scheduled around business, and quietly around him. This one was her answer to the question he had asked 7 weeks ago when he had looked at her across her kitchen and said, "Come back with me." For real this time. 5 days. She was supposed to have 5 days of tying things up, automating the Lagos side of the business, handing things over, preparing herself for the biggest decision she had made since she signed the divorce papers. Instead, she was standing in her bathroom holding a positive pregnancy test and completely unable to feel the joy that was trying to break through because underneath it something else had already gotten there first. The calendar. That was the thing. Not the result itself. The calendar. She and Minjun had been good during those 7 weeks. Really good. Intimate in the way of two people who had found their way back to each other and were no longer pretending they hadn't. So the pregnancy was not impossible. It was not even surprising. But her mind went straight to a week she had spent months trying to bury. A Tuesday night that became a rooftop. A rooftop that became too many drinks. Too many drinks that became a morning she had woken up in a room that wasn't hers, reaching for a man who wasn't him. Michael Damsey. That week. And the terrible, specific, stomach-dropping thing was that Minjun had come back to Lagos that same week. The same week. He had shown up at her studio the following Tuesday. They had been together. And the timeline between Saturday and that Tuesday night was close enough that standing in this bathroom right now she could not, with any certainty, tell them apart. She did not know whose baby this was. That was why the joy could not get through. That was why when Minjun's name lit up her phone screen, the most natural thing in the world, picking up for the man she loved, the man she was 5 days away from flying across an ocean to be with, the man who had finally become everything she had spent years asking him to be, felt completely impossible. Her phone stopped ringing. The bathroom was very quiet. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bathtub, test still in both hands. Phone screen going dark beside her. She sat with it for a long moment. Then she opened her contacts, scrolled past his name, and called Amara. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. In today's episode, we bring you reignited love, faded reunions, quarrels, bonds, and dark romance. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on your notification bell so you don't miss out on new story drops. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far these amazing stories have traveled. Now hold on to your seats as we take a deep dive into this amazing story. To understand why Nella Williams was sitting on the edge of a bathtub in her Lagos apartment 5 days before the most important flight of her life, holding a positive pregnancy test and unable to feel anything clean about it, you have to go back 7 weeks. Back to the morning Minjun Kong showed up at her studio door for the second time. Nella was becoming something she had only dared imagine in the early 2 a.m. packaging sessions when the orders were slow and the doubt was loud. The international inquiries had not stopped since the last collection. A stockist in London had come through. A feature in an African fashion publication had brought a wave of new customers from Accra and Nairobi and Johannesburg that her Lagos operation was not fully equipped to handle alone. Her business partner Kemi had been sending her spreadsheets with numbers that required a second look before they became believable. The brand was outgrowing its infrastructure. She was spread across too many time zones from a single Lagos studio, and she knew it. The sole sourcing trips were becoming more frequent, not less. The supplier relationships she had built required presence. The creative direction she refused to hand off to anyone required her hands on everything personally. Something had to change. She had been turning it over privately for weeks before she said it out loud to Minjun. They were on her rooftop, a Thursday evening, Lagos doing its amber hour thing below them, and she had a glass of wine she was actually drinking this time, and he was beside her, and the city was being beautiful, and she just said it. The business is getting too big for me to run it the way I've been running it. He looked at her, listening. I need to be in more places than Lagos, she said. The soul sourcing alone is becoming a full-time thing. And I can't keep leaving this side of the operation every 3 months and expecting it to hold itself together. What do you need? He asked. She looked at the city. I need to automate the Lego side properly. Get the right people in the right positions. Build something that runs without me physically being here every day. He was quiet for a moment. Then, or you could just come back. She turned to look at him. To Seoul, he said. Not casually. Deliberately. Not for a trip. Not for a supplier meeting. Come back properly. Run the brand from there. You would be closer to the production side, closer to the sourcing, closer to you. She cut him off. He held her gaze. Yes. She turned back to the city. It was not a small thing he was asking. She knew that, and he knew that, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Seoul was his world, his empire, his city. Moving there meant stepping back into a life she had once signed papers to get out of. It meant trusting not just him, but the version of him that was still, by his own admission, a work in progress. But the business logic was real. She had been doing the calculations privately for weeks, and they kept pointing in the same direction. Let me think about it. He nodded once, did not push, did not revisit it that evening or the next morning or the 3 days after that. He just kept being present. He left on a Saturday. 7 weeks in Lagos. 7 weeks of coffees and corners and ordinary mornings and a city that had slowly started to feel like something he shared with her rather than something he was visiting. She drove him to the airport herself. They sat in the car outside departures for a moment before either of them moved. Lagos morning all around them. The particular early hour chaos of airport. Trolleys and voices and families, and the smell of jet fuel and something fried from a nearby kiosk. 7 weeks, she said. 7 weeks, he agreed. She looked at him. At this man who had been the most disruptive and the most stabilizing presence in her life, simultaneously for more years than made sense. Who had broken something in her, and then spent the better part of a year learning how to be the kind of man who could be trusted with the pieces. I'll let you know, she said. About Seoul. About all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across and tucked her hair behind her ear. That gesture. Always that gesture. And got out of the car. She watched him disappear through the departure's entrance. Drove home. And sat in her apartment for the rest of the day feeling the particular specific silence of a space that had held someone for 7 weeks and was now just a space again. He landed safely. She knew because he sent one message. Landed with the home emoji. Talk later. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she typed the message she had been composing and deleting and recomposing for 3 days. I've been thinking about what you said. I need 2 weeks to get the Lagos side running properly. Hand things over to Kemi. Set the systems up. And then she cleared it all up and typed. Yes. I'm coming. She read it twice. Sent it before she could take it back. His response came in 40 seconds. I'll have your side of the wardrobe cleared. She laughed. Alone in her apartment at 11 p.m. with nobody watching. She set the phone down. 2 weeks. She had 2 weeks to close one chapter of her life cleanly before she walked into the next one. Michael Damsey called on the 3rd day. She saw his name and let it ring out. He tried again the following evening. She let it ring out again. On the 5th day, he sent a message. Nello, I'm not trying to complicate anything. I just don't want things to end badly between us. Can we talk? She read it, sat with it, then typed back. There's nothing to end badly, Michael. I wish you well. Genuinely. She meant it. He was not a bad man. She had never thought he was. He had just been the wrong person at the wrong moment in the wrong version of her life. And she had nothing against him beyond the particular complicated guilt of knowing that one Friday night in Lagos had almost cost her everything she had spent years fighting for. She did not reply again after that. She had 2 weeks and a life to pack and a business to transition and a future to walk toward. She did not have time for anything that pulled her backward. 5 days before the flight, she woke up feeling wrong. Not sick exactly. Just off. The way your body announces something before your mind is ready to receive the information. She had been feeling it for 2 days and dismissed it as stress. Pre-move anxiety. She went to the pharmacy on her street. Stood in the aisle for longer than she needed to. Bought the test. Went home. And 3 minutes later, she was sitting on the edge of her bathtub, holding a positive result with Minjun's name lighting up her phone screen. Her mind, pointing in two directions at once with equal conviction. The joy was real. The terror was realer. She called Amara. Amara picked up on the second ring. "I need you to come over right now if you can," Nello said. Her voice was steady. Something in her tone communicated everything Amara needed to know without a single specific word. There was a pause. The sound of movement on the other end. "Keys." "Leaving now," Amara said. And hung up. She arrived 19 minutes later. Nello opened the door and held up the test without speaking. Amara looked at it. A hint of excitement gushed at her face, but then she looked at Nello, and her expression was a cause for concern. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her. They sat on the couch, the test on the coffee table between them like something that needed to be kept in sight. Amara reached over and took Nello's hand and held it without saying anything for a moment. Just held it. "How far?" she asked finally. "I don't know yet," Nello said. "I need to see a doctor." Amara nodded slowly. Her expression was careful, warm. And then, because she was Amara and she knew everything, and had been there for every version of the story, her eyes did what Nello's mind had already done. They went to the calendar. "Nello." "I know," Nello said. "The week that—" "I know, Amara." Silence. Minjun was also here that same. "I know." Her voice cracked slightly on the last one. Just slightly. "I know. That's why I called you." Amara squeezed her hand, said nothing for a moment. Outside, the Lagos afternoon was going about its business, completely indifferent to the two women sitting inside this apartment with a positive pregnancy test and a question that only a doctor could answer. "We need to find out how many weeks," Amara said finally. "Practical. Steady. That's the first thing. Everything else comes after that." Nello nodded. "And until we know," Amara said, "you don't say a word to anyone. Not Minjun. Not Michael. Nobody." "Obviously not Michael," Nello said. "Obviously," Amara agreed. "But especially not Minjun. Not yet. Not until you know." Nello looked at the test on the coffee table, at the two lines that had rearranged her entire next 5 days. "I fly in 5 days," she said quietly. "I know," Amara replied. "What if I don't know by then?" Amara looked at her steadily. "Then you get on the plane, and you find out in Seoul." The doctor's name was Dr. Clark. Private clinic, Victoria Island. Amara had also insisted on coming, and was currently sitting in the waiting room pretending to read a magazine she had not turned a single page of. Nello sat across from Dr. Clark in a small consultation room and answered questions she had not prepared herself to answer out loud. Last menstrual cycle. Any unusual symptoms. General health history. Then the scan. She lay on the narrow examination table and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly and deliberately while the doctor worked. The room was quiet, clinical, entirely indifferent to the fact that the answer Nello was about to receive had the power to either save or detonate the most important thing in her life. Dr. Clark turned the screen slightly toward her. "You are approximately 9 weeks along." 9 weeks. Nello did the math the way she had been doing it since the bathroom. The way she had been doing it obsessively for 4 days in the back of every conversation and every business handover meeting. 9 weeks took her back to the week that mattered. The Friday night, the rooftop, Michael, and the Tuesday that came after it. Minjun landing in Lagos unexpectedly. The confrontation in the studio. The 10 days that followed. The reconciling. The intimacy that had come naturally and without planning from two people who had found their way back to each other. 9 weeks sat directly inside all of it. She could not eliminate Michael from the timeline. She could not confirm Minjun either. "Everything looks healthy," Dr. Clark was saying. "Strong heartbeat. Good development for the gestational age." Nello heard it distantly, like someone speaking from the other side of glass. "Are you all right?" the doctor asked. "Yes," Nello responded. "Thank you." Amara was on her feet the moment Nello appeared in the waiting room doorway. She read her face in under 2 seconds. They waited until they were in the car. Amara driving. Lagos traffic immediately swallowing them whole. Indifferent, relentless, the city having no interest in anyone's personal crisis. 9 weeks, Nello said. Amara's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "That's the week," Nello said. Not a question. It's also the week Minjun came back, Amara said carefully. I know, Nello. I know, Amara. She turned to the window, pressed her lips together, held herself. I need a DNA test. I need to know before I tell him anything. Can you do that here before you fly? She shook her head slowly. Not reliably. Not in 5 days. The test needs to be sent abroad for processing. It takes too long. Besides, Minjun isn't here, she paused. I'll wait until Seoul. There are facilities there. Private ones. I can go without him knowing. Amara glanced at her sideways. And until then? Until then I act normal, Nello said. I get on that plane. I go to Seoul. I find a clinic. I get the test done. And I wait for the results. And if... Don't, Nello said quietly. Please. Not yet. Amara closed her mouth, reached across and squeezed her hand briefly without taking her eyes off the road. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The next 4 days were the strangest of Nello's life. On the surface, everything was completely normal. She met with Kemi twice and handed over the Lagos operation with the methodical precision of a woman who had built every system herself. Nello did not care that its founder was quietly falling apart. The brand just kept growing. Amara called every evening. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes Nello just needed to know someone was there who knew the full weight of what she was holding. Those calls were short, quiet. Amara never pushed, just showed up on the phone X, without requiring anything in return. On the 4th night, Nello sat on her apartment floor, half-packed boxes around her. The Legos she had built her life in over the last 3 years being carefully, deliberately folded into suitcases. She put her hand on her stomach, just for a moment, just to feel the reality of it. Something was growing in there. Something small and new and entirely unaware of the complicated world it had been conceived into. Something that, regardless of what the test results eventually said, was hers. Completely and entirely hers. She sat with that for a long time. Then she got up and went back to packing. The morning of the flight, Amara came to the apartment. She did not say much. She helped carry the last bag down, stood on the pavement outside in the early Lagos morning while the Uber loaded up. Then she pulled Nello into a hug that lasted longer than their usual ones. Call me the moment you know, she said into her shoulder. You'll be the first, Nello whispered. Amara pulled back, held her by the shoulders, looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who had been carrying someone else's secret for 5 days and would carry it indefinitely if that was what was needed. It's going to be okay, she said. Whatever it is. Nello nodded, got in the Uber, took one last look back at the apartment building. Seoul was 11 hours away. The answer she needed was somewhere inside those 11 hours, waiting for her on the other side of a flight she had originally booked as the beginning of everything and was now boarding as the woman who needed to know one thing before she could fully step into it. She put her AirPods in, looked out the window at Lagos doing what Lagos always did, and held herself very still for the entire drive to the airport. Okay, we are pausing right here because we need to hear from you before this story goes any further. That pregnancy test just changed everything. And we know exactly what you're sitting with right now because we're sitting with it too. So drop your answers in the comments. If the baby turns out to be Michael's, what does Nello do? Does she tell Minjun everything and risk losing him all over again after everything they just fought through? And what about Amara, because we need to talk about Amara. She was the one who suggested Nello go on that date. She was the one who said just one dinner, just breathe, just one night of not thinking about it. And now her best friend is 5 days away from boarding a flight to Seoul, possibly carrying another man's child. Was Amara a good friend that night on the couch? Or did she hand Nello the match that lit the whole thing on fire? We want every opinion, every take, every city. Drop it all in the comments right now because what happens next is about to answer the question you have all been asking, and some of you are not going to be ready for it. Now, let's get back in. He was at the airport. She had not expected that. He had not mentioned it on any of their calls, and she had assumed, reasonably, based on every version of Minjun she had ever known, that a car would be waiting. His driver. Someone from his team. Instead it was him, standing just beyond the arrivals barrier in a dark coat, watching the arrivals door with an expression she could read from 20 meters away. He saw her. Something moved across his face. She walked toward him, and he closed the distance between them in a few unhurried steps, and then his arms were around her, properly, fully, the kind of embrace that had nothing performative about it, and she pressed her face into his chest and closed her eyes, and for one long moment, she just let herself be there. Here, in Seoul, in his arms. The answer she needed could wait 5 more seconds. "You came yourself," she said into his chest. She felt him exhale. "Of course I did." The apartment was not the penthouse. That surprised her too. She had assumed the penthouse, the place that sat above the city like a statement, the place that had always felt more like a headquarters than a home, the place she had lived in during their marriage and learned to love despite its coldness, because the man inside it had enough warmth in the private hours to compensate for everything the architecture lacked. Instead, he took her to somewhere new, a different building, quieter neighborhood. Still Seoul, still unmistakably, beautifully Seoul, but softer somehow. More residential. The apartment was large and well-designed and full of natural light, and when she walked through the front door and looked around, she understood immediately that this had been a deliberate choice. He had not brought her back to the place that held the old version of them. He had built something new to bring her into. She turned to look at him standing in the doorway, watching her take it in. "When did you?" "Last week's," he said simply. She looked back at the apartment, at the light coming through the windows. Her throat tightened. "It's beautiful," she said. He crossed the room and stood beside her, and they both looked at it together. This new space, this deliberate beginning, and she thought about the positive test in her bag, and the clinic she needed to find, and the questions she was carrying, and how none of it felt manageable right now standing next to him in a room full of light. But she smiled. She found the clinic on her 3rd day in Seoul. She had told Min-jun she had a supplier meeting with Park Jae-won. He had not questioned it. Why would he? Supplier meetings with Park Jae-won were practically a founding myth of their relationship at this point. The clinic was private, discreet. The doctor spoke enough English. The nurse was efficient and kind. The process was straightforward. A blood draw from her, a swab from a sample she had prepared, the paperwork completed in a consultation room. Results in 10 to 14 days. She walked out into the Seoul afternoon and stood on the pavement for a moment. 10 to 14 days. She could do that. She had been doing it for 9 days already. Living with Min-jun was different this time. She noticed it immediately. He had cleared half the wardrobe the way he had promised. Had stocked the kitchen with things she liked. She did not ask how he knew. She just noted the specific brand of tea on the second shelf and said nothing. Had left the studio space in the second bedroom entirely empty with a single message on the whiteboard inside that said only, "Yours." She stood in that empty room for a long time the morning she found it. The walls were bare. The light was good. There was a long work table she had not asked for and a corkboard along one wall, and a window that looked out at a quieter Seoul street than she had ever had a studio window looking onto before. He had thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just cleared a room, but considered what she would need inside one. She pressed her hand flat against the empty corkboard, felt the texture of it, thought about the mood board she would pin here, the fabric swatches, the collection sketches, the next version of Nello being built in a room that had been waiting for it in a city she had once signed papers to leave. Life was strange. Love was stranger. The days moved, beautifully mostly. The kind of days she had allowed herself to imagine during the worst of the long distance, waking up in the same space, moving through mornings together, the easy, unremarkable rhythm of 2 people sharing a life rather than managing a distance. He cooked better than he had in Lagos. She noted this with some suspicion. "Did you take a class?" she asked one evening, watching him move around the kitchen with considerably more confidence than the dish towel incident of 7 weeks ago. The corner of his mouth moved. "YouTube." She laughed. These were the moments. The ones nobody saw. The ones that didn't make it into any version of the story people told about powerful men and the women who loved them. Just a man who had watched cooking videos on YouTube because the woman he loved had taken over his kitchen in Lagos, and he had decided that was not going to happen again. She laughed, and he looked at her laughing, and the expression on his face in that moment was the most unguarded she had ever seen him. The results came on a Tuesday, day 13. She was alone in her studio space. She had covered the corkboard in 3 days, and the work table was buried in the beautiful, organized chaos of a new collection taking shape when her phone buzzed with a notification from the clinic. She set down the pencil in her hand,
Picked up the phone.
opened the email, read it once, read it again. Then she sat down very slowly in the chair at her work table and put both hands flat on the table surface and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way you breathe when your body needs a moment to catch up with information your eyes have already processed. The baby was Minjun's. Paternity confirmed. 99.98% probability. She read that number 3 times. 99.98. 13 days of carrying something that had no clean place to put itself. 13 days of lying beside him at night and feeling the question sitting in her chest like something with weight. 13 days of touching the life growing inside her and not knowing whose it was. 13 days of Amara's steady evening calls and the particular discipline of a woman who had learned long ago how to hold herself together when falling apart was not an option. All of it, releasing, at once. She put her face in her hands.
And cried.
Quietly. In her studio. In her city. In the space he had cleared for her to build something new. She let herself cry for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she picked up her phone. Called Amara. It rang once. Tell me. Amara said immediately. No greeting. Just tell me. It's his, Nello said. The sound Amara made on the other end of that phone was not words. They stayed on the phone for a while, without saying very much. She told him that evening. She made dinner. His recipe this time. The Korean dish he had taught her 3 weeks ago on a Saturday afternoon when they had nothing scheduled and nowhere to be. She set the table. Put on the playlist that had become their evening soundtrack in the new apartment. Lit the candle on the table that she had bought on a Tuesday market walk and he had said nothing about but had not removed. He came home. She was still getting used to the weight of that word applied to a space they shared, and stopped in the kitchen doorway at the sight of the table. Looked at her. Sit down, she said. I have something to tell you, she said. He was already reading her face. She could see him doing it, that quiet, precise attention of his scanning, interpreting, arriving somewhere close to the truth before she had given him the words. Something shifted in his expression. She reached into the pocket of her dress, placed the skin photo on the table between them. He looked at it. The silence that followed was the most complete silence she had ever sat inside. Not tense, not fearful, just full. The way silence gets when it is carrying something too large for words to adequately hold. He picked up the skin photo, looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at her. His eyes were doing something she had never seen them do before. How long have you known? He asked. His voice was steady.
Barely.
A few weeks, she said. I needed to be sure of some things first. He looked back at the scan. At the small curved shape of a life entirely unaware that its existence had just rearranged the entire future of 2 people sitting across a candlelit table in Seoul. He set the photo down carefully, stood up, came around the table. She stood too, instinctively, and then his arms were around her again, the way they had been at the airport. Fully, completely. He held her for a long time without speaking. Then, quietly, into her hair. We're having a baby. Not a question. A realization arriving in real time. A man understanding in a single sentence that the life he had been slowly, deliberately, at considerable personal cost rebuilding, had just become something he had not known to plan for and could not imagine now being without. She pressed closer. We're having a baby, she confirmed. Outside Seoul did what Seoul always did. The city kept moving. Indifferent, unbothered. Entirely unaware that in a quiet apartment in a residential neighborhood a man who had once let the most important thing in his life walk out of a door he didn't fight to keep open, was holding her now like he finally understood what doors were for. The days after the revelation were quiet in the best possible way. Minjun was different. She noticed it immediately and kept noticing it. A new quality to his presence that she did not have an exact word for. He had always been attentive. He had always been perceptive. But there was something added now, a careful deliberateness to the way he moved around her. The way he noticed when she was tired before she said it. The way he appeared in the studio doorway at exactly the right moment with exactly the right thing. Tea, a snack, sometimes just himself leaning in the doorframe saying nothing, just checking. He was paying attention in a new register. She let herself receive it without analyzing it too much. That was new for her too. On the second week he came to her studio and stood in the doorway and said, I want to step back from certain operations. She looked up from the work table. Not everything, he said, but the parts that require the kind of exposure that I don't want near this. He glanced at the skin photo on the board, then back at her. Near them. She held his gaze. This was the conversation she had never been able to get to during the marriage. The one that had lived behind every locked door and every stopped conversation and every carefully managed portion of himself he had kept from her for 3 years. She had asked for it in every way she knew how, and it had never come. It was coming now, not because she had asked, because he had decided. She understood the difference. She understood what it cost him. She understood that for a man whose empire was the architecture of his entire identity, stepping back from any part of it was not a small thing dressed up as a large gesture. It was a genuinely large thing that he was choosing not to dress up at all. Okay, she said simply. He nodded once, turned to leave. Min-jun, she called out.
He stopped.
She crossed the room, stood in front of him, looked up at him the way she had looked up at him in that studio in Lagos when everything between them was still broken and he had cupped her face and promised to show her rather than tell her. She reached up and put her hand on his chest, the way she had on a hotel pavement in Seoul a lifetime ago. Thank you, she said quietly. He covered her hand with his, said nothing. He didn't need to. Nello's new collection launched from Seoul 6 weeks later. She had not planned it that way. The timing had simply aligned, the way things did when you stopped forcing them and let the work find its own rhythm. The Seoul Source Fabrics. The Lagos Soul. The creative direction of a woman who had spent the last year being built and broken and rebuilt into someone whose hands knew exactly what they were doing and why. It sold out in 31 minutes. Her phone was blowing up with Shopify notifications. Amara called from Lagos screaming. Min-jun appeared in the studio doorway at the exact moment the website crashed. He looked at the laptop screen, looked at her. 31 minutes, she said. Previous record? He asked. 40. The corner of his mouth moved. Improving. She threw a fabric swatch at him. He caught it. Michael Damsey sent a message the day the collection dropped. She saw it 3 days later buried under a flood of brand notifications and wholesale inquiries and restock requests. Congratulations on the new collection. You deserve everything. She read it once. Then she archived it without responding. Not from cruelty. Not from guilt. From the clean, uncomplicated clarity of a woman who had made her peace with a chapter that was finished and had no intention of reopening it. Some things deserved to stay exactly where they were. Outside Seoul was doing its evening thing. The light turning, the city shifting registers, the particular beauty of a place that had been the backdrop of the worst and the best things that had ever happened to her. She put her hand on her stomach. 16 weeks. Growing. Entirely unaware and entirely perfect. The following night they sat on the floor of the studio. No particular reason. She had come in to add something to the corkboard, and he had followed, and somewhere between the corkboard and the work table they had both ended up on the floor, her back against the work table, him beside her, legs stretched out, the Seoul night quiet outside the window. The scanned photo was on the corkboard above them. They had not turned the lights on. Just the city light coming through the window. I want to get married again, he said. She went very still. Not now, he said immediately. Not tomorrow. I'm not asking you tonight on a studio floor with no ring and bad lighting. The corner of his mouth moved. I just want you to know that it is where I am going, so you can decide if that is where you are going too. She looked at him. This man. This specific, impossible, cedarwood smelling, YouTube cooking video watching, apartment choosing, empire dismantling, door-opening man who had taken the longest and most expensive route imaginable to becoming someone she could fully trust with the weight of what she felt for him. Ask me properly. When you're ready. And your answer? She looked back at the skin photo on the corkboard, at the Seoul night through the window, at the life that was assembling itself around her in a city she had once signed papers to leave and had somehow ended up choosing with her whole heart. Ask me properly. And find out, she repeated. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached over and took her hand. They sat on the studio floor in the dark with the city outside and a baby coming and a future that was not clean or simple or without its complicated history, but was theirs. Completely and entirely theirs. Built from wreckage. Chosen anyway. Some love stories begin perfectly. Two people. The right moment. Everything falling into place without resistance. This was never that story. This was the story of a woman who drove through rain toward a barrier on a Seoul highway and woke up to find the man she had divorced sitting beside her bed like he had never considered leaving. Who built an empire from heartbreak and almost lost herself in the distance between what she needed and what he was able to give. Who made one decision on a Lagos rooftop that she carried alone across an ocean and inside a secret that only one person on earth would ever know. And a man who loved her through every version of himself. The closed one, the unavailable one, the one who stood at the window of his empire and finally understood what it was costing him and chose, slowly and at considerable personal expense, to become someone worthy of being chosen back. They were not a perfect love story. They were something better than that. They were a true one. Now we want to hear from you. Were you worried the baby wasn't Minjun's? Be honest. How many of you were doing the math in the comments? And do you think Nello made the right decision keeping that secret? Or does Minjun deserve to know the full truth someday? And finally, when he tells her he wants to get married again, and she says, "Ask me properly," what do you think her answer is going to be? Drop everything in the comments. We are reading every single one. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode. This is Afro-Korean Love Stories, and we're just getting started.